The top 6 reasons why I permanently left and moved out of the collapsing United States of America. On February of 2021, I left the United States. I never looked back. I have been so much happier since moving out of the United States. And in this video, I'm going to give you the 6 specific reasons why I left the United States. Reason number 1, top of the list, taxes. I don't know about you, but I don't like working very hard only to give the government 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of my income in taxes I see and taxes I don't see. Now, strangely, most Americans don't seem to mind. I think Americans have become numb to this and they've got used to this, but it drove me crazy to work as hard as I do, only to hand over a mountain of money every month, every quarter, every year to a big, bloated, corrupt, stupid government that does stuff like blow people up in countries that have never attacked us and bail out multi-millionaire bankers and give free money to people who don't want to work and haven't worked for many years and could work, and on and on and on. Americans in the modern era are among the highest taxed people, not only in the world, but in the history of the world. And amazingly, most Americans don't even know this. They think the taxes are not as high as other countries. For many years on my blogs, I would say Americans are among the highest taxed people in the world. And I would get all these comments from all these guys saying, Caleb, that doesn't make any sense. That can't be right. Europe is so much worse than us. You're crazy. That doesn't make any sense. So finally, I did an article at one of my blogs. I will put a link to it in the description below, where I analyze all the money the typical American pays. And if you add up all the different taxes that Americans see and Americans don't see, many taxes you pay you don't see, the typical average American, not billionaire, not poor person, the typical average working American pays anywhere from 51 to 70% of his entire income in some form of tax to the government. I'm sorry, that's insane. Now, I'm not an anarchist. I'm a minarchist libertarian, which is close, but I am not an anarchist. If I need to pay 5% in tax or 7% in tax to pay for roads and police and courts and basic systems like that, I think that's perfectly fine. 50%, 30%, 70%, go fuck yourself. Even worse, Americans don't get anything for that money in most cases, at least in Europe, where they have also very high tax rates, which is also insane. I didn't move to Europe. Are you kidding? I wouldn't live in Europe either. But in Europe, at least they get something for their taxes. They get a bunch of free shit. They get free healthcare. It's not very good healthcare, but they do get something. America, unlike Europe, is a corporatist system rather than a socialist system. So in America, you pay super high taxes and get nothing for it. It's the dumbest system on earth. Now, obviously, if you don't make very much money, if you make $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, taxes is probably not a concern for you, then fine. But I'm one of these hardworking guys and my income is a little higher than that. And I got tired of getting constantly battered over the head every month, every quarter, every year with paying some of the highest tax rates in the world when I could just move to another country and not pay the vast majority of those taxes anymore. Today, I pay far less than 10% on my total income in some form of tax. And I make a decent income. That's a lot of tax savings for me. And that was the biggest reason, although not the only reason, I left the collapsing United States. Reason number 2 that I left the United States is that Americans have lost their minds. These days, in the 2020s, Americans have basically broken themselves out into 3 categories. The first category is the woke left. These are insane people who live in this Disney fantasy land where everybody is racist, they hate free speech, big pharma goes from being evil to suddenly being 100% truthful, we gotta trust everything they say, and various other insanity. And unfortunately, they're winning and they're getting away with it. Yes, they get pushback, but the United States becomes more left-wing every year across the board, and it's been that way for at least the last 25 years, starting when the baby boomers took over the United States back in the 1990s. The second category of people are what I call the former right. An easier way to describe them would be Trump supporters or Trump-ish type people. You don't have to support Trump specifically to be in this category. You know what I'm talking about. As I've talked about many times, the left wing has always been insane. The right wing went insane about 15 years ago, somewhere around 2010, when Obama was president, when they lost the culture war. And at some point during that time, they just lost their minds and they went just as insane as the left, if not more so. Today's modern day version of the right are people who seem to think that if you vote for a man-child like Donald Trump, everything will suddenly be fixed and America will be great again. They also think that if you just scream loudly enough on places like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, then somehow you'll change your country and you'll fix your country by getting really mad at left-wingers and insulting left-wingers. Again, these people are completely insane. They've lost their minds. You saw how effective they were at trying to solve problems when they voted for and elected Tantrum Trump back in 2016. Did that make America great again, guys? No. Then you have the third category of people, and that is the big unwashed masses in the middle. These are people who are either ignorant or these people who are centrists, but these people in the middle enable these two groups of psychopaths, the Trump right and the woke left. And basically, living in the United States, as long as I did, felt like, to me, living in an insane asylum. I was living in a land full of crazy people, none of whom made any sense, who were constantly spouting off about politics, not knowing what the hell they were talking about. Here's an easy example of that. If you ask a right-winger or a left-winger what their opinion is on gay marriage, they will go for an hour screaming and ranting about their opinion about gay marriage, which is an issue that affects a fraction of 1% of the United States, because only about 3 or 4% of people in the US are actually gay, and only a tiny percent of gay people actually bother to get married. So in this little teeny tiny microscopic topic, both the right and the left can give you a 3-hour oration on their opinion. But if you then ask that same person what's their opinion on the Federal Reserve, an issue that affects 100% of all Americans and most of the planet, they say, what's that? There you go. When you have a nation full of irrational, insane people, they vote for the worst people in all of modern history. The United States has had not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 of the most ridiculous presidents in U.S. history, all in a row. You have Joe Biden, who is basically a walking corpse, a man who can't even speak. He is so old and so dementia-ridden. Then you had Donald Trump, who is basically a man-child who thought that Russia owned Norway and didn't know the difference between HPV and HSV, and is also guilty of obstruction of justice. He admitted it on video, and is guilty of violating the Emoluments Clause. We know this for a fact in his tax returns. Then before that, you had Barack Obama, one of the most murderous presidents in U.S. history, a guy who murdered hundreds of thousands of people with his drone strikes, a guy who started spying on your emails and spying on your phone calls and taking what George W. Bush did and magnifying it. Then you had George W. Bush, who is probably mentally deficient, a guy who had invaded countries because he said God told him to do that, and then he would invade a country and say, oops, wrong country. Before that, you had Bill Clinton, a man with deep-seated mental problems, who was doing things like giving nuclear technology to the Chinese. This is what happens when you have an insane country. They vote for insane people, and they further the collapse and the decline. I'll get to that one in a minute. Reason number 3 I left the United States. The government of the United States has become way too big and way too intrusive. I don't know about you, but I like freedom. I know most Americans hate freedom these days. I know I'm an outlier, but I like freedom. I like to do what I want and live my life and not have the government butt its nose into everything I'm doing. The modern day US government is the largest and most powerful government in the history of the world. It is so big and so powerful that Roman emperors would jizz their pants at the amount of power the US government has and the money it spends. Pre-pandemic, before the pandemic, if you added up all local, state, and federal government spending in the United States, the number was $7.9 trillion with a T dollars a year. $8 trillion a year. Where does that money go? Well, I'll tell you where it goes. I'm an international traveler. Anytime I arrive in the United States from an international flight, it takes me anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour to get through security. Literally. Even when I got things like global entry, it still takes a long time in most American cities to go through their big, bloated government airports. Today, I live in Dubai. Is Dubai perfect? No. Should you move to Dubai? Probably not. It depends on the person. But when I land in the Dubai airport, you know how long it takes me to get through security? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Even faster now that I'm a resident here in Dubai. That's just one little example. When I land in America and go through an airport, the security guards ask me all kinds of questions. Who are you? Why are you here? What's your address? What do you do for a living? What fucking business is it of yours? I am never asked these questions when I go anywhere else in the world, and I travel to many countries all over the planet. First world countries, second world countries, third world countries. None of them give a shit. None of them bother me. None of them ask me questions, with rare exception, unlike the US government. And then, often the security people at the airports, they don't like my answers. Sometimes, I don't say this anymore, but I used to say this. They say, what do you do for a living? I'd say I'm a business consultant, which is the truth. And they say, well, what does that mean? That sounds pretty fishy. Fuck you! In my two new home countries, Paraguay and Dubai, you know what they tell me when I go through security? They say, thank you, go. Awesome. That's how you run a government. Now, are these governments perfect? No. Can you say negative things about Dubai or Paraguay? Yes. I'm talking about on the overall, these governments are nowhere near as authoritarian as the US government. And if you think Dubai is more authoritarian than the US government, watch that video right now where I give you some specifics as to why it isn't. I could give you so many examples. If you go get a driver's license or have to renew your driver's license down at the DMV in the United States, you're going to sit there for an hour. You're going to sit there for an hour in most cities. In most other countries, including here in Dubai, it takes about 12 minutes. You walk in, they hand you a thing, you leave. As I have said many times, and as you guys who are more internationally minded and internationally experienced already know, in most countries in the world, even countries that have more corrupt governments or even ostensibly more authoritarian governments, in those countries, the government doesn't mess with you unless you mess with it first. In the United States, the government is constantly messing with you all the goddamn time. And if you like freedom, it doesn't make any sense to live in the collapsing USA. That's the next reason I left. Reason number 4 I left the collapsing USA is because it's collapsing. America's dying. I've talked about this a lot. I've shown lots of data on this, statistics on my blogs and other places. I have a video coming up on my YouTube channel where I go through 25 to 35 statistics showing that the United States is collapsing. The United States will collapse in our lifetime, and there is no one you can vote for to stop it, Trump supporters, Bernie Sanders supporters. It's going to happen in our lifetimes regardless of what you do or who you vote for. I was born in 1972. I'm 50 years old. In that time, I have watched every key important economic statistic of the United States get worse. You name the statistic, it's probably gotten worse over the last several decades and continues to do so. If that's real wages, if that's inflation, if that's stock market bubbles, stupid wars, you name the stat, single motherhood, all these things. You name the stat, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and will continue to do so. And I've said before that the only two things that have actually gotten better in my lifetime in the United States are technological growth, which is good, and crime rates have gone down. However, in the last few years, as America gets closer to collapse, crime rates for the first time since the 1970s are now going back up. You can watch that video right there where I talk about crime rates in the average American city. It's getting really bad. So even crime rates now are getting worse. I don't know about you, but I don't like to live in a country that is on the decline and is going down the toilet. I would prefer to live in a country that is either on the rise, which is where I am now, Dubai, one of the fastest growing countries in the world, or at least maintaining, a country that is maintaining even keel, place like Paraguay. I don't want to live in a country that is going down, and I certainly don't want to be there when the collapse occurs. That's why I got out while the getting was good. Many of you who know my content know that many years ago, I was planning on leaving the United States in 2025. But when the pandemic hit, when I saw all that insanity, when the Floyd riots hit, I saw all that insanity, both on the left and the right. I said, okay, I am not waiting 2025. I'm getting the hell out now. I got out in February 2021. I'm glad I did. I haven't looked back. I've talked about how in the 1970s and early 80s, my dad was a low-income worker and he was able to support a family of 7 in the United States on his own income. It was hard, but he was able to do it. Today, the typical man in the United States can't even support one person. He can't even support himself. He's got to have roommates or live at home with mommy and daddy till his 30s. Does that sound like a country on the rise? Does that sound like an economically booming country or an economically collapsing country? It's the latter. Worse, no one is going to fix it. As I mentioned earlier, all Americans, including modern-day right-wingers, Trump supporters, and Republicans, are quasi-socialists. They think that free government healthcare is a great idea. They think stimmy checks are great. Even if they bitch about them, they'll say, ooh, this is great. Free money from the government. Yay. This is the vast majority of Americans. So when you have a collapsing economy, plus the vast majority of people are quasi-socialist or at least pro-welfare state, that's a recipe for disaster that is not going to be fixed, and I don't want to be around when the shit hits the fan. Number 5, and this is an interesting one because most Americans don't seem to care about this, which is the second part of that problem. America attacks too many countries. I have a huge problem with the amount of death and destruction that has been caused by the United States military over the past 25, 30 years of my life. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And Americans, amazingly, just don't seem to care. They just don't give a shit, which is even worse. I mean, it'd be one thing if we were all over the world killing hundreds of thousands of people in 6, 7, 8 different countries, and Americans were rioting and protesting and say, how dare you do this, which is what they used to do back in the olden days. But today they go, whatever. Just in the past 15 years, we have been in wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Niger. Why are we in these countries? Why are we spending our tax dollars bombing these people and killing these civilians? And we kill a lot of civilians. Obama and Trump killed a lot of civilians. I suggest you do your own research. It's pretty horrific. Bill Clinton killed thousands of people in Kosovo. George W. Bush killed thousands upon thousands of people in Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama drone striked and killed hundreds of thousands of people in numerous different countries. Trump increased Obama's drone strikes by over 300%. This gets worse and worse and worse, and Americans either don't care or they kind of like it. I just did a video, you can watch it right there, on the fact that Americans have become so bloodthirsty, so pro-war. It's insane. When Putin invaded Ukraine, all these guys said, well, he had to invade Ukraine. He had to kill thousands of people. What? When Trump tried to withdraw from Afghanistan, he didn't. But when he tried to do it, the left-wingers, the people who are supposed to be pro-peace, lost their fucking minds, say, oh no, we have to stay there and keep troops there and keep shooting people there because we have to help these people. When Trump bombed Syria for literally no reason, it was the first thing he did as president, most Trump supporters said, so what? By the way, the first thing that Biden did when he became president, he bombed Syria for no reason too. And no one gave a shit. For some reason, modern day Americans have become bloodthirsty monsters that either don't care that their government and their military that they're supporting with their tax dollars are killing hundreds of thousands of people all over the earth, or they support these things. I have had numerous discussions with people on the internet saying that we should withdraw troops from Libya, Afghanistan, all these other places. And people both on the right and the left and the left and the left say, oh no, we gotta be there because of X, Y, and Z. We gotta keep killing people. I can't look into the eyes of my children and tell them that I tacitly supported this by staying in that country. It makes me sick to my stomach, and that's one of the reasons I left the United States. Now, does that mean that the countries I live in are perfect? No. Dubai is involved in some of the stuff in Yemen. Paraguay was involved in a war a while ago. No country is perfect, but we're talking about an issue of degree. No other country flies its troops all around the world into 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 countries, sometimes more than that, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians, while their people go, so what? Let's argue about transgender bathrooms. We don't care about people getting killed. Who cares? Reason number 6, I left the collapse of the United States, is the opportunity in the future is not in the Western world. The Western world is collapsing. The true international growth-based and mobility-based and freedom-based opportunities in the world are not in the Western world going forward over the next several decades. While the West dies, Asia rises. Now, it's rising slower than it used to, but it is still rising as the West collapsing. There are lots of countries that are rising steadily and strongly. My 2 countries, Dubai and Paraguay, are 2 examples of this, while the West gets worse and worse and worse every year. Most of the population growth, both due to babies being born and people going into those countries, is occurring outside of the West, not in the West. If you don't believe me, watch that video. I give you real statistics. Most of the countries with the lowest tax rates, who are most friendly to entrepreneurs and business owners and investors, are outside of the Western world, not in the Western world. Most of the fastest growing cities that are growing fast because hardworking immigrants, not immigrants looking for welfare checks, but hardworking immigrants who move there because they want to work, are outside of the West, not in the West. Most countries that are building up their infrastructure, building their buildings, building hospitals, building bridges, literally, are outside of the West, not in the West. Living in the non-Western world is exciting and fun. It makes you happy to see growth. Living in the Western world, particularly places like the UK, parts of Canada, the West Coast and East Coast of the United States, is depressing and horrible and makes you feel like shit. Once again, I would rather live somewhere that is on the rise where people are happy and excited instead of somewhere on the decline where everyone's furious about politics and pissed off about problems they can't even fix. If you like this content, how to create location-dependent income or move to a less bad country or at least set up an international backup plan, you should subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, leave a comment on this video, and leave a like on this video. And that way you'll be sure to get this content for free in the future. If you want some examples of 11 cool places that you could move to that are much better than the United States or other Western countries, you should watch that video right there, and I'll see you in that video.